I would like to introduce Piero Irrera, who is the founder and CEO of CONNECTO Consulting, who's going to be moderating this session, and he will introduce the panelists.
Hello, good morning. Good morning and welcome to everyone. My name is Piero Irrera. Thank you very much, Liz, for this nice introduction. I'm the owner of CONNECTO Consulting, and I'm very honored to moderate this panel here. Especially, I'm delighted to have a very distinguished group of experts here this morning, late morning with me, covering a broad scope, both in terms of geography and also in terms of industry perspective. So please join me in welcoming the panelists. Ronnie Preiskel from Preiskel & Co., law firm from London. Then Lior Levy, Director, Carrier Relations from Viber RAKUTEN. Then Ranjith Cherickel from iLoco. And Amine, how are you? I can see you. Okay. Amine Kandil from N+ONE DATACENTERS from Morocco. So Ranjith is from Kenya, and Lior is from Israel. So please join me in welcoming the panel. So, yes. Can you hear me? Yes. So you might have asked yourself why there is a panel on African markets at Capacity Europe. Africa has not joined Europe recently. So the first reason definitely is what Liz explained, this very exciting move from Capacity Media to Africa. But there is another reason why we are here today, and this is why because this neighboring continent really outperforms the old European continent by far. We're talking about 50 countries with a total of 1 billion people, half of them 30 years or below, and mostly eager to go online, to consume and learn and innovate digitally. So perhaps as a kick-off, I would like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Please also mention your company's focus and your engagement in the African markets. Amine, would you please start?
Yeah, so Amine Kandil, I'm the CEO and founder of N+ONE Data Centers. We're an enterprise data center operating in Morocco. We have two large facilities over there at the moment. We're very much an enterprise data center, and we've been showing up at these events related to telecoms because it's the next frontier for us, at least, to go and capture new customers.
Hi everyone, my name is Lior Levy. I'm the Director of Carrier Relations with RAKUTEN Viber. So RAKUTEN Viber is a global company, and we are focusing a lot on Europe and Asia, but Africa has always been there also as a big potential for us, and not just a potential because if we're looking at our spread, then especially in North Africa, but also in some countries in the Midland, we are very much working and very much active, and we are giving the population there the option to communicate on a freeway in a much cheaper way than they used to. Let's say voice and SMS in those countries, in that continent, was something very expensive, and due to Viber and other OTTs, we were able to help decrease this whole market, and we believe that we've changed it for the better.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Preiskel from Preiskel & Co. We're a boutique law firm based in London, and we specialize in telecoms and technology. And we've been working with companies working in Africa for a long time, ranging from mobile operators, data centers, service providers to the telecoms industry, MVNOs. So we've got deep, sort of deep knowledge of working in the area.
Thank you. Ranjith Cherickel, I'm the founder CEO of iColo.io. We are a data center operator primarily based in Kenya. We have 2 data centers, one in Mombasa and one in Nairobi. Currently looking at some new markets, and hopefully in a few years we have a slightly larger Pan-African footprint. We do primarily and only co-location, so we provide space, power, security, and we work with a variety of very large customers from across the globe. We support enterprise customers as well as some of the larger platforms that most of us use on a daily basis.
Thank you very much. Just a quick feedback from the audience. Can you hear us? Well, is everything okay? Good. So then let's dive into the topic, and probably to kick off this discussion. Please, can you explain why, from your perspective, it is worth taking a closer look to African markets? So why are you here? Why do you think it's worth talking about it? May you start? Can you please start, Lior?
Yeah, sure. So from our perspective, we look at Viber as an OTT and how it helped people communicate better. How did Viber actually start getting spread out around the world and also in Africa is very interesting, because if you look at OTTs today, then you're usually looking at the messaging side, and this is the easiest way for people to communicate. But Viber started mainly as, let's say, a voice solution and not a texting solution. So if you look at today where Viber is well penetrated, is mostly where you have high termination cost. And needless to say that Africa, termination cost is not cheap, and especially in North Africa. So Viber actually started in the Middle East, looking at Lebanon and Jordan, and from there we actually started to move to North Africa, to Egypt, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, and just going down to the other countries there, like Mali and Ethiopia. And if you look at what we're actually doing there, it's, first of all, we were a disruption. We know that. We were a disruption to the telcos. And gradually, with time, I think both sides, OTTs and telcos, understood that they must do business together. This is what we're here for. We need to work together with the telcos. The cooperation with them is important. Viber would not have any justification without telcos. We would not be here. And telcos, from their point of view, they understand that we're here to stay. We are the preferred method for subscribers today to communicate on messaging side and also on the voice side. It's also there to stay. If you look at the retail traffic around the world, it's decreasing, but Viber's retail traffic is actually increasing because we know how to communicate with our subscribers. We know that they use the app for everything that they need, and that also includes retail traffic, paid calls outside. So our penetration in Africa really helps us with expats also outside of Africa. So you have a lot of people from Algeria, Morocco, based in Italy, and France, just for example, USA as well. And they're using our platform to communicate. They're using our platform to get in touch with their families there. And I think that we have a very big part there. And this is, let's say, how we change especially the North African market.
Okay, thank you. So two aspects, from disruption to cooperation, and then the exchange from Africa to other countries. Thank you. Ronnie, what is your perspective on why we should take a look at African markets?
I think what we see is that companies are looking for growth. They find it hard to find growth opportunities in Europe, and they look at some of the African countries where you've got relatively young populations, good growth opportunities, and relatively, in a European perspective, undeveloped markets. So we see people investing in, let's say, Kenya and looking at sort of developing data centers there, or we've got a client in Malawi trying to develop a new mobile operator there. So people see opportunity there, where in Europe they find it harder.
Okay, thank you.
So I mean, my perspective is maybe a little bit more different because, I'm an entrepreneur like Amine. It's very hard for us to build stuff in Africa, right? So you live there, you build stuff. For the vast majority of people, it's an opportunity. For us, it's very exciting because there's nothing. We really literally have to build everything from the ground up. So certainly the checklist on, yes, is there growth, is there an opportunity, the fact remains that using the internet in London is no different from using the internet in Kinshasa, Mombasa, or any part of Africa. For that, somebody has to build the infrastructure. For us, that is very, very exciting. So if you ask us, where is the opportunity? All of it is the opportunity because nothing exists. Literally nothing exists. I think on the mobile, so we went from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G very quickly, and I would say we've caught up in many instances, especially on 4G. But everything else is a big fat zero. And everybody, it's comical for us when we come and have a meeting with a big platform here. They talk about megawatts. We're still less than, we're talking tens of kilowatts at best, a really big deal. So it's a very different perspective. So the opportunity is immense, and it's very difficult not to crystallize the fact that 1.3 billion people, most of them below the age of 30 or 40, don't want to use the internet. Of course they're going to use the internet. You can't use the internet without the infrastructure for the internet, which means servers, which means data centers, fiber, all of the above. And none of that exists today. So if you ask me, it is undoubtedly by far the single largest opportunity that's there.
Okay, so interesting view. Opportunity, yes, but also barriers. We're talking about barriers and obstacles later.
I frankly don't think there's any obstacle. So I think one of the things that when people talk about Africa is, there's corruption, there's, also, it's a perception discussion. I'm not entirely sure that there is any fact and merit in that. I was talking to a colleague a little bit earlier on. If you work in the US, you work without a contract. You just go show up for work and you start working. Europe, can you imagine having a job without a contract? Africans, we don't really care. We just want to get it done. So is there risk? Of course there's risk. And I think the security everybody looks for, certainly with lawyers and on the panel, is mitigation for all risks. That you do not have, and I grant that. But I think everything else is not very different.
Okay.
You need permissions for everything. You need to follow the rules. You've got to pay the taxes, which is what often people are not willing to do there. I think there are some extremely successful. There is another compatriot that built a data center 10 years ago. It's $1 billion company today. And they built it at a time when nobody wanted to build infrastructure in these countries. So I definitely think, there are issues, but not, they're just tactical.
Thank you.
To be solved.
I mean, what is your view on that?
Well, I come from a completely different perspective because I tend to not like to hear about Africa as a one thing because Africa is not a country, it's actually a continent. The opportunities you might have in Central Africa, West Africa, North Africa, Morocco, Algeria are going to be very different. So there isn't one opportunity, there are many opportunities, and depending on the country you're going into, you're going to have to deploy differently. And that's why, from where I sit at least, I watch all of, and I hear all these things happening, and with some amusement sometimes, because in my market, for example, there's no way you could imagine a hyperscaler setting up shop. Impossible, because of the regulatory environment, because of many other aspects. But there are other opportunities, mainly in the enterprise, building local cloud solutions. We have data sovereignty laws that you don't find in other countries in Africa. So we have a very specific opportunity. And I hear a lot about internet, about telcos, but I hear very little about what data centers are doing for the enterprise in Africa, right? The focus is on hyperscalers, connectivity hubs, and it seems to me that the enterprise is a bit left out, and that's actually a huge market segment that we're very focused on. So there are many opportunities, but you have to look at it country by country. And there's a huge execution risk. I have seen folks show up from a European country into an African country, opening up a data center. Fast forward 5 years later, you'll find that data center is still empty. And people can't figure out why. And that's execution risk, not adapting your offer to that specific local market you're into.
So two very two interesting aspects. One, country per country view, and also a focus on data center, which we're going to have. I mean, two representatives here, so I'm looking forward to that. First, before we do that, I would like to go to one topic that easily comes to your mind when at least from outside, you look at African as a continent, and that's mobile. That's the mobile market. So according to the GSMA, there will be a 10% growth by 2025 in the mobile internet usage, and in addition, we've seen platform economies or mobile-based platforms disrupting local industries, but not from outside, mainly from local tech startups. So when it comes to mobile market, what do you think are the reasons and the impact of this mobile growth? For the moment, just on the mobile market, so what do you think are the reasons and the impact? Perhaps Lior, can you kick off again?
Yeah, well, from our perspective, there are a lot of things that we take use of the mobile penetration and the fiber growth there. One of the key things that we're doing is we're providing our users an easy access to money transfer. This is there's a very increasing trend of money transfer via the OTTs, and we give the users the platform to do it. If you look at all the expats working in Europe and USA, for example, wanting to send money, so they have all the other options, but the best option for them is just use their current OTT platform. They're already using us for everything else, so why not send money to the family back using Viber? So this is one key thing that is growing in Africa. Another interesting thing that we're doing is bots and communities. Just for example, our mother company, RAKUTEN, is also the prime sponsor of Barcelona Football Club. And what we did is a very interesting bot for Barcelona Football Club in Viber. So we can see, for example, in Algeria and Libya, it is a very popular bot when all the fans of the football club just go in and they look at the community, look at the bot. We share over there the squads and highlights and everything, and that really helps them. It helps everyone with the communication to the club and for the users to get engaged with the football club. Besides that, we have other bots like a prayer bot and a horoscope bot and all these things that are very interesting for the users. In terms of the mobile operators themselves, another interesting thing that we're doing in Africa, I have to say it is still growing. It is not as big as we want it to be, is a zero-rate plan in which the mobile operator will go out to the users with data being a key thing like we've just reviewed. And as a marketing tool, they would offer Viber for free of data usage. So they would go out to the users, they would say, if you purchase 1 gigabyte, whatever, you will get Viber and OTTs for free. So this is a marketing tool as well that we do together with the mobile operators. We started to do it in a couple of countries. We had a very successful one in South Africa as well, where we saw very nice growth. And I think in terms of the traditional voice, we started to cooperate with the mobile operators to offer subscription plans that are very customized to the user. If we have a user, let's say, texting a lot to Algeria or using free Viber to call Algeria, we would just complete the whole picture with using a subscription plan. So we would work with the MNOs there, we would work with the MNOs in Tunisia and Algeria, and offer our users for that 20% of the time that you're not using free Viber, because we know you want to use free Viber, you're looking for free services, and that's fine. But for that 20% of the time, let's say if you want to call a fixed line or you want to call your grandmother that doesn't have Viber, etc., for that 20% of the time, you can still use Viber, but you just do it through the subscription plan. And this is one of the increasing trends that we see, that Viber came in with the Viber-free services. All the costs across the world decreased, and now we can bring back the traditional voice calling via the OTT. So that's a very interesting cycle that was created, and eventually it benefits the customer, it benefits the user. And that's one of the cooperations that OTTs and mobile operators can do together, and we see it as a very positive thing.
Thank you. Any other aspect on drivers or impacts of mobile growth from your side?
Generally, what mobile has done is democratize the internet. Everybody has access. You know, some of it slow, some of it fast. What we are definitely seeing in our markets is there is lifestyle substitution for paying for data, for example, or paying for voice. So instead of spending it on food and shoes and clothes, people are using that as an important lifeline to what they do. Mobile has also created interesting markets and trends where, for example, it's a savings tool. People put money on mobile money, for example, which didn't exist before. So banks are becoming less and less relevant. You pay your taxes online. You pay, you know. So it's no longer, it is fundamentally far more in Africa than in Europe. The dependence on a mobile phone and access to, especially in a country like Kenya, to a certain extent, some of the other countries in East Africa. But certainly, you know, a mobile is no longer a tool. So often we have the discussion that, yes, you need a smartphone, except they're already there. Most people I know in Africa have a smartphone, you know, including the people that have. So it's, you asked the question, what is the impact of mobile?
Driver and impact.
You know, it's completely changed. It's transformed the continent. So it's not a peripheral impact. It is fundamentally shifted the way people live. It's
an interesting aspect because you look at the banking infrastructure or the low banking infrastructure in some African markets at least as a weakness, but it turned into actually into innovation strength. So now the innovation in mobile banking is coming from Africa.
Yeah.
Would you like to add something, I mean, from your very different market or when it comes to mobile or anything?
I think it's the same. I think it's the same trend, and it's something we've been hearing over and over again. Africa is also leapfrogging, skipping some steps and going directly into some technologies such as mobile. You may not have a landline, but you have a mobile line. So we skipped that infrastructure deployment. Same thing is happening across the whole African continent, okay. And it'll continue to grow.
Good, thank you. So, what are the moving a little bit away from or beyond mobile? In general terms, how are telecom companies and perhaps even countries adapting to take or to adapting to this dynamic? What do you see? Do you have examples as a success stories? How do countries or companies have to adapt themselves?
Well, personally, I'm seeing that the telcos are scrambling to find alternatives and new sources of revenue, and we see them entering markets we didn't think they would enter. Who thought 10 years ago that a telco would become a bank? didn't make sense. But now we're seeing them behaving more like banks. I mean, they don't do lending, but they do money transfers and they do a bunch of other things. Telcos are now entering the media market also, trying to deliver content, trying to create some content. Because if they don't do that, they will become irrelevant. So I'm not sure what the future holds for them, but they have no choice but to transform. Mobile is an asset that they have. They have the eyeballs. So they're trying to figure out and putting together different types of products that could ensure their survival down the road.
Okay. So moving to other segments from the operator perspective. Thank you. Ronnie, would you like to add something?
I think from my side, we see people investing in the core infrastructure. So, there's been over the last few years, a sort of focus on subsea cables, data centers, looking at sort of big pipelines to increase connectivity. And then we see the sort of move towards increased coverage. So obviously, there's a huge continent and sort of extending mobile coverage, operators outsourcing their towers to tower companies to sort of effectively reduce the capex and building out the networks. So the sort of focus seems to be on effectively expanding the capacity and then expanding the reach so that you can basically bring everyone or more and more people into mobile coverage and then using the mobile services.
Okay, thank you. So coping with the investment risk by sharing and by concentrating. Yeah, thank you. Now moving to other segments, like we've seen recently major sea cable investments coming in, and now the growth of data centers. So what would you describe as the Ranjith, you said everything is opportunity, but out of the opportunities, what are the top 2 or 3 that African companies and or from abroad could focus on?
I mean, so there are some fundamental facts that have still not changed. You're looking at some of the lowest GDP per capita numbers in the world. You have high growth, but fundamentally you are talking about a factor of a few thousands between a business case that exists in Europe for the same commodity as it exists in Africa. Anything to do with the internet, I think in general makes sense. So not so much voice in the classical sense, because it's to a large extent been replaced. So there is probably a long-term model for 4G, 5G in some of these countries. There seems to be a lot of popularity in Kenya especially, and I think so wireless ISPs. So because of the lack of fiber infrastructure in a larger part of the country, connecting and bringing people online, the wireless ISPs seem to be more successful than the traditional mobile network operators because they're giving unlimited bundles and things like that. Data centers, yeah, certainly that's interesting, I think, to a large extent. I think from an enterprise perspective, there is quite a lot of drive and move towards moving things onto a combination of private, hybrid, public cloud type setups. And a lot of that is driven by data residency laws and things like that, so at a macro level, yes, there are very large infrastructure investment opportunities, but also at a slightly more micro level, you would find that there are definitely opportunities in building companies that are focused on providing cloud services at a local level, where people can still, sort of talk and feel. Fiber is a big investment opportunity in Africa, and I think that's something that is really difficult to understand, because if you take a big country like Nigeria or even Kenya, you have 200,000 people connected by fiber, which is, for a country with 50 million people, it's nothing. So there's very large buckets that are available, but you have to balance it with the fact that your GDP is 1/100th of what is a comparable business case in the other side. So your growth, so that there is a lot of dependence on the ability for the countries to go from a $15 billion economy to a $500 billion economy in 20 years. And that really is the big question.
Well, fiber infrastructure is definitely a difficult one. Even in countries like Germany, we have below 3% FTTH coverage, so for different reasons, but that's, of course, it's a difficult one, yeah, but an opportunity, of course. Anyone else would like to add something on the top opportunities? Otherwise, we move to like issues, obstacles to both local companies and from abroad for an engagement in Africa. Someone would like to volunteer for that?
From what I see, at least, well, the list is long. Huh? It's been 10 years that we've been in business, and we kind of got used to it now. And but I think the number one aspect is the business culture, or at least the way decisions are made. It takes us, or it took us. It's accelerating a bit lately, but our average sales cycle from the day we start talking to an enterprise to closing is about 18 months. So imagine you start talking today, you sign 18 months later, and then you relocate the data center, it's probably a 6-month project. So it's actually very exhausting. It takes a lot of stamina to keep at it, to be able to deliver results and on numbers. Coming from abroad, we're used to something different. You come in, decisions get made a little faster, things get done in a different way, productivity is higher. That's one challenge. Another challenge is resources. It's extremely difficult to find qualified resources in Africa. A lot of telcos operating in Africa are actually based outside. Some have offices in London, some have offices in other areas of the world, but very difficult to find resources, and when you find them, you have to keep them. We tend to forget that a lot of Africans are trying to leave Africa, looking for a better opportunity outside. So you hire them, you recruit them, you train them, they get better, they learn, then they leave, and you find them here working in Europe. It's another big challenge that we have, and that touches some other topics, because it takes a whole ecosystem to get people to stay where they are and give them a better opportunity in their own countries. So these are two that come to mind quite fast. I'm sure friends here can have some other input.
Ronnie or Lior, would you like to contribute, Ronnie or Lior?
You know, what I see the people that we deal with worry about is, as outsiders looking to invest in sort of certain African countries, they worry about political risk or instability, issues around corruption, in the sense that if you have Western backers, you have to have these very stringent policies in place on how that would work in an African context. Whether it's just a perception or whether it's a real issue, there's still an issue about convincing your investors that you're going to have a clean business there. How to cope with currency risks. Certainly in some African countries, the currencies can be quite volatile. So if you're building a business case here with Western backers, how do you deal with currency risk, where the currency might devalue quickly, yet your costs are coming in dollars? Sometimes some countries there's tax instability in terms of your tax rates can sort of be unclear or change quite rapidly. And I think resources, as you mentioned, seems to be an issue where the expertise, you need to have local people who understand the local culture, but then the technical expertise seems to be all foreign, and how you put the two together.
Okay, thank you. The last topic I'd like to touch actually is this notion of cooperation and partnership between global brands and local companies. Are there any specific examples that have been successful? Ranjith?
Yeah, we are probably a pretty good example of that as ourselves. So, Icolo is a Kenyan company. We, Predominantly, in fact, all our staff are Kenyans. We don't really have any expats. Everything is run and developed. But one of the reasons we were quite successful in building world-class data centers was the fact that from day one, we worked with Interaction. Interaction helped us in the early days in putting together what are fundamentally, you know, first world data centers. They helped us with the design, the build. They also gave us, of course, capital to help develop this. So they were willing to take that risk in a manner where, of course, you know, the long term they would enjoy the fruits of it. But you have to give them credit for the fact that they helped us bridge 20 years of ignorance, or, you know, experience is probably the right word, where we didn't make those mistakes that they made in the first 20 years. And they gave it to us and helped us now build very good data centers. And I think that is the reason why we've been able to. Mombasa traditionally is not a city that anybody thinks of as a city where you would connect and you would build, is a global network location. It is now, as a result of the fact that we've been able to put together, right? So I would say, and you know, kudos to them for having taken that risk and working with a team that is unproven in a country that is not known for technical expertise in being building. So I do think, you know, more and more examples you have of that. And I'm not saying this is charity that they did, certainly it was commercially driven, but the faith and the trust with which they went in as a global brand to say, yeah, actually, yes, there is some chance that we'll get started by this, but you know, we think these guys can do it, I think is quite important for more and more of these global brands to do that.
Okay, thank you. So long-term view, trust, and then also help the local partners to avoid the mistakes the industry has done in the last decades. Thank you. Amine?
Yeah, but the other way around also, they do have things to offer us, like what happened with you, Ranjith, but we also have things to offer to big corporates because we can actually speed up their deployments. We have local know-how. If I take our example, we have some stringent data sovereignty laws in Morocco, and we wanted to offer cloud services. So we partnered with Microsoft and started to deploying stacks locally. So we're giving the client a similar experience to what he would typically get through Azure if he were on a public cloud, but we're delivering it in Morocco. And this is something that worked kind of the other way around, where our ability to deliver locally helped the international brand actually still capture revenue locally for its global customers.
So otherwise the market wouldn't have been accessible probably for those brands.
Absolutely, and also, you know, when you come in from abroad, and these large corporations can actually have some very complex rules and don't have the flexibility that we have locally. Contracting locally, clients getting a local contract versus a global contract. Sometimes take a bank, for example, in one of our countries, they will not accept that in the contract, the jurisdiction that would oversee in case of a litigation or would happen outside. They need it to be local. So we're kind of a buffer that allows or that enables international corporations set up shop in Morocco.
Good, thank you. So perhaps a closing question to the panel before we move to the audience, to the questions to the audience. Very briefly, what is your mid to long-term vision for the continent when it's as a telecom market? What do you see? What do you see it in like 5 years, 5 to 10 years from now? Lior, would you like to kick off perhaps?
So, I mean, from our point of view, it is very clear. If you look at what my friends here are doing with the data centers, helping 5G, helping all the internet getting faster and better within the continent, we see how the use of OTTs is spreading out. And once this will happen, it will help the users free themselves from the telcos themselves and using their services and moving on to better and easier things via the OTTs that the internet now enables them. So if you're looking at the future 5, 10 years from now, I'm sure we will see the smartphone penetration getting higher and higher. And due to this, all of the internet services, starting with the mobile, spreading out, and I'm positive that this would be eventually a very positive experience for everyone, and the telcos themselves, knowing that they need to adapt to that platform. They're already doing this, but there are still many countries where you see that the smartphone penetration is low. So in 10 years from now, I assume it will be very, very high, and this would change the whole telco industry.
Okay, thank you. Ronnie, would you like to continue, please?
I think that, well, my assumption is the market will be completely transformed within a, let's say, 10-year period, because there's sort of, as Lior was saying, the penetration of smartphones, additional capacity will be actually quite transformative in terms of the way people conduct their life and businesses. I think, as was mentioned before, the sort of access to mobile has transformed the way people operate, because they didn't have computers and fixed services at home. So it really opened a new world to them. And I think that we can also see sort of large investment in Africa infrastructure in the more physical sense, or with the sort of Chinese initiatives, and that's also going to bring a lot of money and resources into these countries, which will basically then fuel extra demand in terms of the communication services.
Thank you. Ranjith, what is your view in 5 to 10 years? What will it look like, the market?
It's not any different from what my colleagues have said. I mean, I think the future is bright. I think you should expect more innovation. You'll find that a lot of the problem solving that happens will be from the continent for their unique sort of situations. And I think in general, mobile and internet and connectivity becomes more and more integrated. It also will solve some of the root issues around corruption, around the fact that, you know, we have instability with the currency. You will find that trade in global currencies will become, as it already is in many parts of Africa, will become even more and more, thanks to sort of global platforms like Libra, RAKUTEN. And that will become actually easier because we don't really have to ask anybody, we just do it versus discussing it forever here. Yeah, of course, political instability, we'll have all of that, but then there's Boris Johnson, there's Donald Trump, you know.
I
think it's all your perspective.
I wouldn't have mentioned it, but you do, okay. Thank you. I mean, what is your view, like, final?
Well, 10 years is very far. I think we're going to continue seeing Africa adopting technologies faster than we thought. I mean, we underestimate how fast we can adapt and how fast we adopt new technology. So I'm not sure what new innovations are going to come, but we can be sure that we're going to adopt them just as fast as everybody else. Same thing with everything. We're going to keep leapfrogging and catching up by adopting these new technologies maybe before some other countries.
Good, thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience to the panelists? We need to share one of these.
Thank you, panel, for a very interesting discussion. Can I ask, would you mind speculating, my name's John from NTT, by the way. Could you mind speculating about where you think the future hubs for internet connectivity or internet exchanges will be in Africa? We're all familiar with Frankfurt, London, and Amsterdam, for example, in Europe. Where would you speculate would be the kind of core locations for internet exchanges or the exchange of traffic in Africa in the future?
Any target for your question?
Let's start with Ranjith, please.
So 4 years ago, the Nigerian Internet Exchange, which is primarily based in Lagos, had 2 gigs of traffic. I saw them last week. It's at 130 gigs of traffic. NAP Africa had, the first time I saw them was in 2015. They had, again, 20, 30 gigs of traffic. I understand now they're close to 900 gigs of traffic. Kenya, we're probably doing less than 10 gigs, but that's just the nature of how peering happens. So I would say, if you ask me to speculate where the major points of inflection would be for peering, Lagos, certainly, Johannesburg, Mombasa, Nairobi, Ivory Coast. So within 5 years, I think most of these are past the 500 gig mark. So I would say at a high level that this is kind of where it is.
I'll add to that Senegal. I'll add to that Casablanca. The other half of Africa, because North Africa is still in Africa. We always tend to be left off. But Egypt. Yeah, so Egypt, Morocco. I could definitely see Casablanca being a hub. Senegal, and moving our way down. I think also Congo, Brazzaville is actually a very interesting location where it's a good candidate for a potential hub because of its geographic location. So, in addition to your list, of course.
Very interesting, that question. Thank you. Any further?
Thanks. My name is Pete. So going back to some of the other points, what are governments doing, what should governments be doing to help get some of this infrastructure built? So for one example, you see in other parts of the world, say Southeast Asia, Eurasia, special economic zones, which make it a lot easier because they got power and things like that. Any thoughts in particular countries or regions, what the governments are doing that's useful, or what they should be doing?
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting perspective. I'd like to ask Ronnie about that.
I think that as well as the special economic zones, it's important for countries to have sort of stable regulatory environments. So we've done quite a lot of work historically helping companies set up a sort of independent regulatory regime so people can have a long-term view in terms of how their investment in infrastructure will be able to pay back. So I think that people want stability or relative stability, which, you know, given the nature of an African country or, frankly, the nature of instability worldwide.
And a single thing, in my view, deregulation. This is a big issue. We have governments trying to figure out how to make things happen by intervening. But actually what they need to do is not intervene and let the public sector do its job. And for me, it's a golden rule for business. You don't want to enter a country and have the country, at least in my view, building its own data centers for a sovereign cloud. No, it makes no sense. Deregulate, it's going to happen when there's business versus regulating. So.
Good. So thank you very much. I don't see any other hands. Thank you very much to the audience for participating, for being here instead of having lunch already. Thank you very much to the audience. Very, very interesting discussions and aspects. And of course, thank you very much to Capacity Media for all the team for the great job you're doing. Thank you. Bye-bye.